Hi, everyone. Welcome back to another podcast episode. My name is Alicia Gogan, the host of the Glow Up Seekers podcast, where I help you expand your mind and become more self-aware so that you can glow up into the best version of yourself. Hello, girlies. How are we doing? Today is part 4 of our Summer Glow Up series. And if you have not listened to the previous episodes for the series, please go back and do so. But today we are going to be talking about our emotional health because that is something that will transform your glow up journey, your level up journey. I don't think that we can truly become well-rounded women or men, I know there's men listening to this podcast, unless we really address what is going on in some of the deepest parts of us. And I think one of the literal biggest transformations that I made in my life was addressing my emotional health. Now, I realized that I'm going to need to split up the emotional health component of our glow up into 2 episodes. So it's going to be this episode and next week's episode. This week, I want to talk about the mental, emotional side of things. But next week, I really want to touch more on the physical component of your emotional health because realistically, your physical body is not disconnected from your emotions, and your body is constantly responding to your emotional well-being. And for a lot of us, when we haven't had a healthy relationship to our emotions, our bodies tend to be in a very unregulated nervous system state of fight or flight or freeze or fawn, which I want to talk more about the nervous system in next week's episode. But I think it's so important that we realize that our bodies are always responding to how our mental and emotional state is. So the way I like to look at it is your mental state is more of your thoughts, your logistical mind, your analytical mind. When we were talking about last week, having a mental diet and reframing a certain narrative that you tell yourself every day and working on the thoughts that come up into your head and, positive affirmations and things like that. But we also have a feeling state. We have emotions. And I'm going to get into my story a little bit and how I came to the realization of how absolutely important it is to have a healthy emotional life, really, because it's one thing to be somebody who has a good mindset, right? Thinks positively and has good beliefs about themselves and knows what to do and has the right information, but that doesn't necessarily mean that you have a very healthy relationship to your emotions. Before we get into my story, I just want to let you guys know that my one-on-one private coaching is now open. So if you are interested, you will see the link in my description or wherever you're listening or watching this podcast. You can also find me on Instagram. I have my story highlight on my one-on-one coaching, and you will find it in the link in my bio. You can always message me as well if you're interested. Okay, so let's bring it back. I'm going to try not to go too in depth here, but y'all know this is the longest form of my content, so we will go for as long as we need to. So I was raised by 2 very different parents, actually. But let's just talk about my dad's influence on me because I think that this really, he was the reason why it was very hard for me to tap into my emotions. And I also just want to say, I'm not having this blame game of putting anything on my father or, being in this like victim mentality, things like that. Like I've actually come to peace with so much with his relationship towards me and also his passing, everything like that. But I'm just kind of laying out the groundwork here. So my father was very strict. He was honestly kind of a tyrant. He was a very strict Jamaican father. He came from Jamaica at like 13 years old. He had a very strict mother. He didn't tolerate complaining, whining, crying. He really taught me to just be quiet, do as I was told, be a good girl, and that's really it. There wasn't a lot of room for me to express my emotions, to express myself, my authentic self as a child. And, healing from everything that I've been through, I've realized that he just didn't have that emotional capacity to know how to deal with a child and their emotions and everything. And it's crazy because on the flip side, my mom was so completely different. So I feel like throughout my childhood, I did get somewhat of a healthy expression of being able to like express my emotions and cry and laugh and be myself and whatever. But when I was around my father, which was a lot of the times, I was very suppressed. I was taught emotions were not a good thing. They were irrelevant. I shouldn't have them and I should suppress them. And the problem with that is I was a child, and realistically, I'm a human being, and humans, they have emotions. Whether you want to acknowledge that or not, wherever you're at in your life, you have emotions. You experience anger, you experience sadness, you experience fear, everything. And so when you don't have a healthy environment to express those emotions that will inevitably come up through just being socialized as a child and just in general, things happen in your life, what ends up happening is you learn to demonize these emotions that you feel. You don't even know how to express them because maybe a parent around you has never actually told you like, oh, okay, this is how you express your anger. And like, this is what it means when you feel this way. Or, oh, you're sad today. This is okay that you feel sad and you can let it out. Things like that. I didn't have that from my father. And I had a little bit of that from my mother, of course, but you know, when I was constantly around my father, I really was taught that emotions were not okay. And furthermore, if I were to express my emotions, there would be consequences. And so when you get taught from a young age that if you do cry, you're going to get in trouble, you will do your absolute best to never cry. But again, the problem with that is there's going to be things in your life that trigger you and you're going to want to cry. So I was conditioned to kind of be that way. And I think as I grew up, I didn't even really realize how much I was desensitized to my emotions. Like I wasn't connected with myself. I remember being in high school around my friends, or this one friend that I had, she was like one of my best friends. And she was so weirded out from the fact that I never really cried, or we would watch like sad movies and I would never cry. Like I didn't feel anything. Like I didn't feel a lot of emotions. And as I was in my teenage years, my awkward teenage years, I think that really made everything worse for me because I already was a little bit awkward and weird to express if I was really happy or if I was really sad that day because I didn't really have that nurturing home to be able to do that. So it wasn't normal for me to go around my friends or family or anyone else and express myself because I learned it wasn't okay to express myself. And then on top of that, you know, as you're a teenager, things are awkward and weird and you don't know if you should say, like, you're always like scared to say the wrong thing or, you know, people judge you. And so I really became very closed off. I became very monotone. I became very suppressed in a way. I think I did a pretty good job at still being able to socialize with people. I'm very adaptable in a way. I can adapt to new environments, but there was still a huge level of me never feeling comfortable fully, like very awkward and just quiet. I was actually a very, very shy child as well. And even in high school, I mean, I did my best to kind of socialize and be a normal kid in a way, but I knew that there was always things that were kind of closed off, but I didn't really question it. It was just kind of who I was. I just didn't really express myself. I was never too happy or was never too sad. I never cried in front of people. And so that's just kind of how I lived my life. And then as I started to get older, my father unfortunately passed away. You guys know, or some of you guys know, he passed away when I was around 16 years old. And unfortunately, my mom went through addictions. And so I had to grow up very quickly. I all of a sudden had to be very responsible of everything, which, you know what, I'm not even going to say is a bad thing because there were so many things that I learned, even from my father being as strict as he was, as much as there was a lot of unhealthy strictness in a way. There was healthy levels of discipline and structure that I did learn from him. But on top of that, you know, of course, like learning how to be on your own and being an adult. Those were very good things that I had to learn. But unfortunately, too much of that. It was just too much, right? So I was kind of pushed into having to be very, very independent at a young age. And because I was somebody who was not really tapped into her, let's say, feminine side, and we can talk about that I don't know when, maybe I'll unpack that. I'm not saying like everyone has feminine, masculine energy within them, but I wasn't tapped into my nurturing side, my loving, my expressive, my chaotic, my whatever, just like letting myself out. I just didn't have that because I was around my father that wasn't like that. And on top of that, when I had to be very responsible, I didn't really have time to like play and have a good time and express myself and be this like fun child the way that I should have been, because I unfortunately had to be an adult at a very young age. And so I moved into a very hyper masculine woman, honestly. And again, there are very amazing traits that came out of that. I was disciplined. I achieved a lot of things in my life. I got my life where exactly I needed it to be. But unfortunately, there were so many things that I cut off from. I wasn't tapped into my intuition. I wasn't tapped into my emotions. It made it very hard for me to trust people. It made it very hard for me to connect to people because I wasn't connected to myself. All I cared about and all I was really primed for was survival. That was the only thing that I was really like focused on. I was worried about, okay, my schooling, money, how I was going to live without my mother, because my mother was going through a lot of her own stuff and she wasn't able to show up the way that I needed her to. And so I ended up living a very stressful life, and that bled into every area of my life. I was stressed about finances. I was stressed about my health. I was stressed about school. I was stressed about relationships. Every single thing I was stressed about. And I didn't realize how the disconnection that I had from my emotions and the hyper masculine identity that I took on was affecting my physical health, really. And me being this hyper masculine and stressed out and disconnected from myself led me down a very long path of health issues, chronic health issues. And my first breaking point was when I got diagnosed with ulcerative colitis when I was I don't really even remember when, somewhere in my early 20s. And I actually didn't, now I know, but back then I didn't realize how my mental state and my disconnection from my emotions and all of the traumas that I went through and the way that I was operating in survival mode, all of that was creating this really unhealthy physical state within me, to the point where now I have an autoimmune disease. And back then I didn't know what I knew now. I didn't understand how it's so important to address your mental state and your emotional state and how that affects your body. But when I first got diagnosed with colitis, I just tried to address it through my diet. I was like, oh, okay, I'll just like search different diets and exercise. It must be the things that I'm eating. It must be my movement. And although that's definitely a component of becoming a healthier version of you, I didn't realize that a lot of the things that I needed to address was in my mind, was my emotions, was my, like the fact that I was living in a survival mode all of my life. And no matter how much working out or dieting I did, it wasn't going to change the fact that I was unhealthy mentally. And so I would try the diets, I would try the working out. And realistically, a lot of the diets and the working out was from a place of me wanting to even change myself in the first place because I didn't like how I looked and I wanted to be accepted by everyone. But every time that I did that, it would work for a little bit, like not even really. It would sustain me a little bit, but then I would get a flare up or I would become unhealthy again because I actually wasn't addressing the root cause of my disease. And this is, I'm not going to like sit here and tell you that if you have an autoimmune disease, that it doesn't have anything to do with your genetics or your biology. And how I look at many health issues is from a place of epigenetics. And I am not going to go into that because one, I'm not a freaking scientist or a doctor. You can look that up, but it's not to say that you're not predisposed to having certain health issues, like things that run in your family, certain genes, whatever. And ulcerative colitis does run in my family. But what I believe to be true is my environment turned on that gene for me. I was very, very stressed. And every single person in my family who does have ulcerative colitis, they have gone through many traumas. I come from a line of, unfortunately, generational trauma, a lot of stress, a lot of unhealthy thinking and believing and environments and things like that. And so, your environment and where you grow up and everything around you can really trigger certain things within your body in a really unhealthy state. So that's just how I look at things, by the way, because I'm not just going to say like, oh, I just like thought my way into an autoimmune disease. Like there are definitely biological things that are still happening, but I do think that your environment and your mindset and your traumas, turn things on or off for you. So anyways, when I was trying to address my colitis from that standpoint, things never really sticked. I still just was on medication and I was still having stomach issues. I still had health issues, but The more that I looked deeper into why I kept falling on and off of diets, once I started to realize that fad dieting and doing all of these obsessive diets anyways wasn't working, I started to address more of my mental health in a way. And I realized that my health condition always seemed to lessen the more that I had a better mental state, the more that I was happier with my life, the more that I was working on myself. But I still around like in my early 20s, I didn't really see that connection. I was just kind of stumbling uphill until, of course, where I'm at right now. But one other thing happened, another rock bottom that was really, really huge, which is where I'm going to bring this episode to, and which transformed my life, was when I had nerve pain. And like I said in last week's episode, I talked about it a lot, how I had nerve pain in my hands for damn near almost 2 years. I didn't know what was going on. I literally tried every single thing. I got cortisone shots. I was going to get a carpal tunnel surgery because they thought I had carpal tunnel, which is insane because I was like 25 years old. Like, what do you mean? I did ketamine shots at a clinic because they thought that like that would help me reset my nervous system. My pain signals were all off. I did chiropractor. I did acupuncture. I did physio. I told you guys already. I did everything until I started to change my mindset and how I looked at my health conditions. And I realized the way that I was going to heal, which I didn't know how it was going to even heal, but I just knew for me to get out of this hand pain, for me to live the life that I really want, I need to change my mindset first. I need to change my mindset from being a victim of being somebody who believes that she's not going to get well to someone who knows she's going to get well somehow. There's going to be some answer. Something's going to change. I don't know what it is. And I really tapped into my masculine energy here, my logical brain. And I told myself, like, of course things are going to change. Of course I'm not going to be like this forever. I didn't know what the answer was going to be. I didn't know how I was going to heal, but I just knew that I had to change my mindset first, and which I did. And like I said in last week's episode, that led me down to a path of learning the information and the modalities in which was going to allow me to heal. And so I want to talk about some of those things that I learned through the process of healing to help you heal, to help you tap into your emotions more, to help you release. And this is the thing. You don't have to have colitis. You don't have to have nerve pain. You don't have to have this chronic whatever. But this is so important that you address somewhere along your glow up journey, because one, you're going to need to, and hopefully it's going to be before you burn yourself out, or you're constantly in cycles, or you have some sort of health issue. But you can't deny and ignore the fact that you have emotions, the fact that you've been through traumas, the fact that you probably need some sort of inner child healing, the fact that you need to address certain parts of you that you have not actually fully addressed, right? And this is not to look at yourself like you're broken or that you need to heal before you like have a great life, but it's so important if we want to be this glowed up version of ourselves that we do tap into this part of us. And I will only assume that a lot of you have either had health issues, or you've dealt with depression, or you have been somebody who's been hyper masculine and you've had to be independent, and you're on this healing journey and you're trying to figure out like why I feel like this, or why I'm burnt out, why I'm like this. A lot of it has to do with the fact that you actually haven't gone deeper into your emotional body. So how can you heal? How can you tap into this part of yourself? Well, I'm going to give you some of the things that I have done. So the first thing that I did without realizing where this was going to take me and where this ended up leading me was out of hand pain, out of pain in general, and really just healing more than I ever have, was emotionally releasing. And I want to just quickly mention Nicole Sachs. She is a licensed, social worker / she does like therapy and stuff. She has a very big Instagram and a podcast, which I have mentioned before, The Cure for Chronic Pain. So if you're somebody who does struggle with any sort of health issues, I highly suggest you go look into her content. And in general, start to look for people who talk about chronic pain and the mind-body connection. But I think starting with her is really helpful. And what I really learned from her was it is so important that you emotionally release the things that you have been thinking, feeling, suppressing, denying, rejecting, hating on, whether that be about yourself or towards other people in your life. And this is the thing, when I was in pain, I didn't really think like, oh, I need to sit down and journal about how much anger I have towards my dad or my mom or anything. I didn't I knew my story. I knew that I didn't have that healthy relationship with my dad. I thought that I healed from that. Like, I understood my story. And because I was a very hyper, masculine, independent woman, I kind of took care of my shit. Like, I got my stuff done. I figured out my life, whatever. But I didn't realize that there was still a lot of hurt, a lot of sadness within me, a lot of anger. And on top of that, there was a lot of anger towards my mother and just my life circumstance in general, especially if you've been somebody who's very strong and doesn't cry a lot and doesn't, you are really responsible and you just take on that brunt. Most likely you haven't really actually released. You haven't really let yourself express how you're really feeling. And like I said, I never was really one to cry a lot. Like, I really didn't cry unless I was like super, super overwhelmed. And even when I did that, I just like do it by myself. But I didn't really let myself cry a lot over my father or over my mother and the relationship that we didn't have and things like that. So she taught me to do this thing called journal speak, I think she said it was, but I just ended up just doing my own kind of thing in a way. Like, it just wrote out how I was feeling. But this is what I'm going to say. You don't have to be in pain in order to do this. And I think it's very, very helpful that you look at your story, your upbringing, the relationship that you have towards your parents, or the relationship that you didn't get, and writing out all of your true deepest feelings about those people and even yourself. And so this is not a journal practice that you're going to want to be perfect with. This is a journal practice where when I was writing things out, I was writing literally my deepest thoughts about people and my certain situation in my life, and to the point where I was ripping these papers up and throwing them out as soon as I wrote what I was feeling out, because this is not something that you really want people to be reading. This is the thing. When you are truly emotionally releasing, you are saying, feeling things that you've suppressed all of your life, things that are not appropriate to say to people, things that if you were to say to people, they would probably get mad at, or things that they would be upset about. But the truth is, you feel those things about them. And this is what I realized. I realized, actually, you know what? I was fucking pissed off about the fact that I had a father who taught me how to emotionally suppress myself, my authentic self. And again, I'm not one to be, the victim mentality, like, oh my God, see, like, my parents did this, that, and the third. I've gone past that because I've done this practice, but there's still room to always be that victim, right? So this is really allowing yourself to just be that true victim of who you really weren't able to be. So for me, I was pissed off. I was so mad at my father for not being the dad that he should have been. The fact that he just didn't allow me to express my emotions, or I didn't feel safe enough to cry around him, or I didn't feel like I could go and play with my friends because I felt like a fucking slave because I went home every single day because he demanded of me to go home and do like hours of dishes and hours of homework that I did not understand, and I couldn't ask for help because he would yell at me. Like, there's so much. I literally felt like a fucking slave, like literally, and I'm not even exaggerating. And so I let that shit out. I literally wrote as if I was writing to him. Like, I told him how mad I was at him. I told him how fucked up it was that he treated me like that. Like, I literally wrote all that stuff out, and it felt so good. And of course, naturally, it's like, oh my God, I can't do that. I can't say that. I can't, whatever. It doesn't matter. You know why? Because you actually feel that way. You actually, deep down, there's a part of you that feels anger towards that parent or sadness. Okay. So another thing was like, and I did this for my mom too. I don't actually mean I wrote this to my mom. I just wrote this out, and I'm totally fine with her knowing this. And I've had these conversations with her before, but I wrote out how angry I was about how she wasn't the parent that I needed her to be, and how she decided to really be that teenager when I was supposed to be a fucking teenager. And also all of the sadness and the longing that I was actually feeling deep down when I was 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, realizing I was never going to have that mother-daughter relationship that I really wanted. And how I was really good at telling myself that I was okay with that, but I wasn't okay with that. And so I let out the feeling of anger and sadness and just like longing and wishing and hoping for things that weren't going to happen, that I just missed and I wasn't going to get back. I wrote out all the ways in which my life was so fucking hard and so fucking stressful and so incredibly just such a struggle, and how everyone else had it better than me and how it wasn't fair. I literally let out all of my true deepest feelings towards everything. And on top of that, I did that with myself. I wrote out all of my true deepest insecurities, my shadows, all the ways I was disgusted with myself, all the ways that I hated how cringy I was, or how I didn't look like this, or how I looked like that, or whatever it was, or all the mistakes that I made in my life that I tried to ignore and suppress. I brought those up and I was like, damn, like I fucking made those mistakes and I'm not proud of it. Like literally everything. And I cried for days. I did that every single day. And the reason why I was doing this every single day, this is not something that you need to do like all the time, but I find if you're struggling physically with an ailment, it's very, very important to emotionally release as well. But I had learned from Nicole Sachs how important it is to do this when it comes to actually having physical pain in your body, because your body is literally storing these thoughts, these feelings, these emotions to the point where you're literally feeling pain. And so I was doing this as a daily practice, morning, noon, and night. I was just writing and I was letting things out and I was purging. I was literally purging and I was crying. I've never cried that much in my life. I never really was that real with myself about how I felt towards my mom, my dad, my family, my situation, my everything. But I let that shit out. And I swear to God, it changed my entire life. And so I suggest, and this is what I'm going to say, I'm going to preface this by saying there's going to be certain things that you've gone through in your life, deep levels of trauma that could be way deeper than I went through, right? And I'm also not giving you guys the full backstory of what I've been through. Obviously, I've seen a lot of things that a child should not have seen. But I do know that a lot of you guys have gone through worse things than me. So what I'm going to say is you have to be careful with this, because there's going to be a lot of emotions, a lot of things that come up. If you don't really know how to handle these emotions, it might be better that you do this type of practice with a therapist or somebody who knows how to hold space for you. This is not going to be for everyone. And I think that if you just try this and if you just feel like it's too overwhelming, then that's fine. You don't have to do it. But I think that it was such a huge turning point for me, because I was like, holy fuck, like I unlocked this part of me that I was suppressing. And you know what was underneath all of this anger, sadness, all of this confusion, all of this longing for the things that I didn't have? Was my inner child. There were parts of me, very young parts of me, that I never learned how to connect to. I learned from my father and sometimes even from my mother to deny, to push away, because that wasn't useful for me. And so once I let out all of this rage, anger, like shame, whatever, all of my emotions, I realized like, whoa, okay, I have this new version of me here, which is this little girl that didn't get what she was meant to get in her life. She didn't get the love from her father. She didn't get the proper mother-daughter relationship with her mom. She didn't get all of these experiences where she got to play and express herself and just live her life. And, you know, obviously I had to let go and forgive and move on from the fact that I wasn't going to get that from my parents. But then I realized, of course, because I'm that creator versus that victim, I get to do that for myself now. I get to reparent myself. I get to nurture this inner child, this part of me that my parents unfortunately couldn't do, but I can do it now. I can meet her needs a new way. I can meet her emotional needs a new way. I can go explore and create a life where her needs and wants are considered, where she does have a say, where she gets to actually be herself. You see, when you live in survival mode, you ignore your internal guidance system. You ignore your body. You ignore what you actually need for yourself, because you're so focused on making sure that you are alive and safe that you do a lot of things that aren't actually healthy for you, but you have learned that that's the only way to do these things. Let's say slowing down when you are burnt out. If you have grown up learning that your needs and your wants are just not important, and you just don't listen to your emotions because you're not even tapped into that, and you don't see any value towards that, when your body is literally telling you to slow down, you're going to be like, I don't care. We're still going, right? Like, I don't really care. Like, we need to work. We need to whatever. You don't really see the benefit in slowing down. And on top of that, maybe you've been taught, like for me, my father taught me, okay, well, doesn't matter if you want to slow down or you want to rest or you want to whatever. Like, we're doing this thing, very masculine, very harsh. But the problem is your body is speaking to you. You do need to slow down. There are going to be things, especially when it comes to your health issues, which is why I personally believe when you start having health issues, that's when you really need to listen because you have not been listening. And I'll give you a clear example of when I started to realize that I had different parts operating within myself, aka my inner child, that was always driven to do certain behaviors that I thought were self-sabotage, but it wasn't really self-sabotage. It was just a part of me that learned how to do a certain behavior to self-soothe. And because I was such a hyper masculine person and I just always ignored my true needs and wants, every time that I would start a diet or I would do something that I thought was supposed to be good for me, I would end up falling off and going into these unhealthy behaviors, not realizing that there was a part of me that was trying to self-soothe by going to candy, by going to unhealthy food because she was scared. She didn't know how to handle her emotion. She was overwhelmed. But I looked at myself as, what the fuck are you doing? Why are you eating candy again? Why are you falling off a diet? Why aren't you being perfect? That's the energy that I had towards myself until I realized, wait, I have clearly a part of me that is doing some behavior that is actually not sabotage the way that I think it is. There's something going on here. And until I learned how to really release my emotions and drop more into that feminine energy and be more loving and kind to myself, only then was I able to realize what was actually going on, which was my part of me, my inner child, was trying to self-soothe because she was really overwhelmed. She didn't know how to handle emotions. When somebody walked away from her in her life, she didn't know how to tell herself that things were going to be okay, so she went to food. These are things that you're not aware of when you are constantly in survival mode and when you're constantly in this like hyper masculine perfectionist mindset. And so I realized instead of getting mad at myself for going to the sugary foods or always falling off these strict diets, I started asking myself, what do I need here? Why am I doing this? Not from a place of self-hate, but a place of exploration, a place of being curious, not from a place of my tyrant father type of identity, but actually from my loving motherly identity that I did have, that I learned how to tap into once I started to release my emotions and let myself actually cry for once. I started coming at myself from that energy, and when I came to myself with that energy, I realized what was actually going on here. And there was a little part of me, a child, that was so scared. She didn't know how to deal with her emotions. She didn't know how to process her fears. And she had a lot of low self-worth. And so, when things in her life did come up that really created this emotional response, all she knew how to do was to go and run and hide and be shy or go to food or go to candy. And what she really needed was a healthy parent to work through those emotions when they did come up, when she would go to school and she would be nervous or she was trying to make new friends, but she didn't know what to say. She really needed that parent to be loving and walk her through things and be there for her and help her have this healthy attachment style. But really, unfortunately, what I got was not that. And so the way that I learned how to deal with those emotions, the fear, the unknown, was through candy or was through self-soothing in an unhealthy way. And so what we do is we bring these self-soothing behaviors that we've picked up once in childhood and we bring them to our adult life. They can change for sure, but somehow, some way, we usually translate that into our adult lives, and then we get mad at ourselves for doing the same thing over and over again, not realizing that there's a part of us that needs us to listen, that needs us to actually finally meet its needs. And the way that I learned how to even have a dialogue with this part of me and understand what I even needed was doing something called parts work. And I did a lot of examples on my TikTok a long time ago, which I will link that playlist in the show notes and stuff, but you can also get the book called No Bad Parts by Richard Schwartz. I think it's a very good book to get. And also I have a journal guide, which I'll talk about at the end, but my inner child discovery journal prompt guide. If you struggle with connecting to yourself and really even knowing what your inner child is or feeling or how to talk to your inner child in that way. So essentially parts work is you taking on the consciousness, the identity of your young self and speaking out or speaking to someone from that perspective or journaling out from that perspective. what does your inner child really feel in this moment right now? And you let her speak. You let her take the stage. You let her speak for the first time ever, because you never, ever, ever learned how to let her talk. And for me, my father never let me talk. So I really got good at just dismissing and denying whatever it was I was actually truly feeling. So letting out those emotions, letting out what you truly feel is so important, because only then will you be able to actually know how to aid yourself in healthier ways. And for me, bringing it back to candy is a very good way to make yourself feel better in moments where you feel uncomfortable, moments when you feel scared, moments when you just feel like you don't know how to handle things. That's how I learned how to deal with weird emotions that I never learned how to deal with. But of course, obviously going to candy all the time is not helpful. And I found the more I was strict on myself through high school and college, and I wanted to strictly diet, it actually created more emotions that I didn't know how to handle, because I felt very restricted. And so I would end up falling off my diet and going back to candy. And then I would get mad at myself for doing that, not realizing that I was creating so much emotional distress in my body, and I wasn't dealing with these emotions properly. And what I really needed was to let my emotions out, let myself cry, let myself talk to people, connect to people, go to therapy, set boundaries, communicate with people in a healthy way. I wasn't doing any of that. And this is the thing. We look at self-sabotage as a bad thing. We think that we are literally, there's a part of us that we can't control that's, for whatever reason, is doing something that we don't want it to be doing. And it's just so sabotaging, and we hate it. But you need to understand that there's always a part of you that is convinced that whatever the behavior it's doing is doing it for your benefit. My young self thought that going to candy was going to be the way to help me feel at ease. That was the only way she knew how to feel okay in that moment, when she was scared around her father, or when she was alone in her room all the time, or when she was in social situations where she was too shy to like say what she really wanted to or whatever. That's how she learned to cope. So you need to understand, actually, not even just understand, you need to have a different energy towards yourself moving forward if you actually want to heal. And this is what really changed the game for me. And this is how I learned how to love myself, was looking at myself from this place of, I was always just trying to keep myself alive. I was always in survival mode. And how beautiful is that actually, that my young self, all these little parts of me that have been suppressed and denied and rejected, all these little parts of me are just trying to keep me safe. I'm always trying to keep myself safe. And that is what you are doing. So stop looking at yourself like you are bad, you are wrong. Stop hating on yourself for the things that you do, because realistically, the things that you're doing is all because there's parts of you that are convinced that these behaviors are keeping you safe. And it's just stuck in a consciousness, not understanding that these unhealthy behaviors are not a healthy way of dealing with your emotions or self-soothing. And once you understand that, you realize, okay, what do I need now? When I don't know how to handle my emotions, instead of going to candy, what can I do? How can I reparent myself? How can I hold my inner child's hand and say, we don't need to go to candy anymore. We don't need to go to unhealthy relationships anymore. We don't need to not communicate our needs anymore. We can go somewhere where it's going to be healthy. We can go get help. We can go to therapy. We can go to people around us who know how to hold space for us. We can go and do healthier behaviors because we deserve these things. And that's truly what it means to reparent yourself, to heal, to love yourself. I didn't even understand, guys. I did not understand truly what it meant to love yourself until I realized that I had an inner child that was always actually just trying to keep me safe. Quite frankly, I was never able to actually love myself because I was always looking at the behaviors that I was doing as self-sabotage. And until I actually changed my mindset and realized this is not self-sabotage, this is just my inner parts trying to keep me safe, only then was I actually able to actually love myself and actually tap into that feminine energy and that nurturing, loving side of me and use that to help myself heal. You see, the thing is, when we're talking about masculine and feminine energy, that masculine energy, it's not to say that masculine energy is not healing. It's very, when we actually get healthy masculine guidance from a father, a man, or within ourselves, right? It's very healing in a way because it's protecting, it's keeping us contained, it's keeping us safe. But what we really need here is that feminine nurturing side of us. We need that motherly side of us that we never learned how to tap into, and we never learned how to give ourselves because we were in such survival mode that we didn't have time to nurture. We didn't have time to slow down. We didn't have time to listen to our inner child, but we need to do that moving forward. And that's what I realized I needed to do. I realized in order for me to heal, it wasn't going to be from this tyrant, hyper masculine side of me, because that part of me didn't want to listen to my emotions, didn't want to hold space. I had to realize that the way that I was going to stop, quote unquote, self-sabotaging was going to be from a loving place, a place of understanding why I was self-sabotaging in the first place, and understanding what my inner child, or what I needed. Really, what do I need? And the truth is, I didn't get that when I was younger. My mom did her best to do that for me, and I can thank her till the end of day for that, thank God. But there were so many times where I needed my father, or I needed somebody in my life to come to me and say, what do you need right now? You're feeling alone. I know you're feeling alone. This is how you deal and process with the feelings of being alone, or this feeling of uncertainty, or this feeling of going into a new social situation for the first time when you're very young and you don't know like where you stand or how to have conversations and things like that. Like, this is not to say that we don't experience uncomfortable emotions when we're young, right? But the thing that we really needed in those moments is to have healthy parental guidance to literally guide us through those emotions, to help us understand the emotions, to help us understand that, just when there's change, or when there's unknown, or there's an uncomfortable emotion coming up, or a feeling of uncertainty, we don't have to be afraid of it. We don't have to think that it's like the end of the world. We don't have to suppress this part of us. We can explore this emotion. We can express it. And I think one of the biggest things that transformed my relationship towards myself is being very curious and asking the question of why. Why do I feel like this? Why am I doing this behavior? Why? Start to get so curious as to the thoughts that you think about yourself, about the world, the behaviors that you're doing. So let's say you are falling off certain quote unquote healthy behaviors that you should be doing. Why am I falling off these behaviors? What do I need? Am I doing things that are out of alignment? Am I not listening to my true emotional needs right now? My inner child, does my inner child need something that I'm not aware of? Even when it comes to relationships or certain like activities that you do in your life, if you find that you're feeling uneasy about them, or you're falling off, or you're pushing them to the side, or you're afraid of them, or whatever it is, go inwards and ask yourself, why am I afraid right now? Why am I pushing things off? Why do I keep going back to unhealthy situations? There's always a part of you for some reason that is doing that. And I think that doing parts work can be very, very beneficial. Like I said, I'll definitely link some examples of how to do that. And of course, that book, No Bad Parts by Richard Schwartz, can help. But just being very aware of your story and understanding that there's probably a lot of parts of you that you have not tapped into or let out, in which might need a little bit more attention from you. And how you start exploring that is bringing your pen to your paper, or letting things out with your words and being very honest, letting the parts of you that are so suppressed and so deep within you, let them have a voice, let them speak. Stop telling yourself that you know how you should feel, or how you should think, or how you should act. Let yourself for a moment just be who you are authentically. Because this is the thing, we have a very big protector part of us, our identity, who we think we are, right? The independent girl who knows her worth, and she knows this and she knows that and this, that, and the third, and she knows what's good for her and X, Y, and Z. Okay, well, you also keep doing these weird behaviors, and you keep having these unhealthy thoughts come up in your mind all the time. So obviously there's something that's going on within you that you are ignoring. Stop ignoring yourself. Stop ignoring your inner child. Every single one of us has an inner child. We have parts within us that have probably not been really cared for, taken in consideration, and or simply just need a little bit more time to express, time to be let out. And this is the thing, when you start exploring your inner child, you will find some profound answers. And the more times you build this relationship to your inner child, to the parts of you that you have been ignoring, you will find yourself in deep alignment. You will start taking actions in your life that consider your inner child, what your inner child needs. You will stop driving yourself into relationships and work situations or financial situations or just whatever. You will stop creating this life that is very not aligned. And this is the thing, like sometimes when you're unfulfilled in relationships or you're unfulfilled in a certain career path or your life in general, it's because you're really taking that action from a place of only knowing part of yourself. You've only decided to get into relationships or career paths because you told yourself that that's what you like, but you have so many parts of you that you haven't discovered that need to be brought out so that you can actually see the full picture of where you're supposed to be in life, where you're supposed to go in life. So if you're somebody who's struggling right now with self-sabotaging behaviors, or you're dealing with any health issues, or you're just feeling very unsatisfied in your life, it is so important that you start a practice of emotionally releasing. You start becoming curious by thinking back to your past, the relationship you have towards your mom, your dad, your siblings, your friends, anything that's happening in your immediate life, like even your relationships now, doesn't have to be in your past, whatever, and let out your emotions. What are your thoughts? What are your feelings? What are your everything? Let it out. And I did my first ever podcast. It's all about letting go, forgiving, moving on. Go and listen to that podcast if you struggle with moving on, if you feel like you're really hurt from somebody who has maybe wronged you in the past, or you can't seem to come at peace with the parental guidance that you never really had, or whatever it is, right? You can go listen to that episode, but I think that the first step is really just letting it out, being real with yourself and recognizing that there are parts of you that you have been ignoring and denying. And if you want to have this dream life, if you want to have this glow up, this alignment, this healthy relationship with yourself, it's going to take you becoming curious of your inner world. And the more times I got good at really knowing what my inner child needs, just letting things out, really processing my emotions, stop ignoring when I was feeling anxious or sad or uncomfortable and trying to move past it by, adding another goal to my list or another project or another new routine to try and fix my problems. When I just let myself be and feel and release, my life changed. I got out of my hand pain. I literally became the version of myself that I am right now because I decided to move through my emotions and to really deeply heal, to let go of my past, to let out my emotions towards my parents, to mourn that loss, and to every day be aware that I have an inner child within me that needs me to listen more, that needs me to slow down, that needs me to do things a new way and not just always operate from this egotistical survival mode identity that I have been operating out of. And quite frankly, to just add more of that feminine, nurturing, loving energy towards myself. And the more times that I did that, every time I got triggered, I would ask myself, what am I feeling right now? What do I need? Instead of getting mad at myself, I started loving on myself more and being kinder to myself. I started to actually heal physically, mentally, emotionally, everything. My life transformed. I became so much more happier, so much more optimistic, so much more grounded, so much more emotionally regulated on the times that things did trigger me and things did come up. I reparented myself. I became the version of me that honestly my young self needed. I became that parent. And I know when I have children, I will literally be able to be that parent that my parents couldn't be to me. And what a beautiful thing to be. Don't we all want to be somewhat better than our parents? And listen, we love our parents, but we usually always strive to do better. And listen, it's a process depending on the trauma you've gone through, the things that you've gone through, the level of readiness that you are with moving on and letting go or processing certain things. It can definitely take time, but I would invite you in the next week leading up into next week's episode, because we're going to talk about the nervous system and how the body plays a huge role into this as well. I invite you to take one actionable step towards you discovering your inner world, whether that be sitting with yourself and looking at your past and the relationship that you have towards your caretakers or the people closest in your life, and really being honest with yourself about how you feel about these things, and you're letting them out. You're writing, you're thinking it out, whatever it is, you're expressing in a healthy way, and you're ripping up those papers because nobody needs to see them. Or even if you're not ready to do that, when you start to do, let's say, a self-sabotaging behavior, you start to become aware of what just triggered you to want to go eat that food, or want to go suppress, or want to go escape, or want to go back to the ex. What emotion were you feeling in that time? And usually it's like loneliness. It's not being able to deal with the stillness of life, the loneliness that you might be feeling when you don't have anyone or anything you think to grasp onto, and start to get curious as to when was the first time you ever felt like that. Because I can tell you right now, the feeling that you're feeling right now before you go do that self-sabotaging behavior was not the first time you felt this. There was a time in childhood, most likely, that you felt very, very alone or sad, or this feeling of let's say a man pulling away from you. It made you feel alone when your dad just put you in your room and wasn't attentive to you and just ignored you or whatever. There's always some sort of correlation, even if it's not the same exact certain experience, it's usually the same emotion. And really just tracing things back and becoming so aware of how really you're reliving so many of your emotions and so many of your traumas really in your adulthood life. And it's good to understand that, because that doesn't need to be the way you experience loneliness anymore. You aren't alone in your room around your father, when your dad is not paying attention to you the same way you are right now in your life. And really taking control of your life and saying, you know what? I can meet my needs in a healthier way now. I have the tools and the resources to make myself feel better the way, unfortunately, I was not when I was younger, because I didn't understand what I was experiencing. I didn't have a parent around me, X, Y, and Z. But now when I feel alone, I have resources. I can go to therapy. I can go get help. I can reach out to a friend. I can go watch a video that's going to make me feel better. I can go outside. I can do X, Y, and Z. Whatever it is that you can have in your toolbox. Obviously, not everyone's going to have the same toolbox, but you getting better at learning how to meet your needs in a healthier way is going to help you heal. And it's going to be so amazing. I promise you, it changed my life when I started to listen to what my inner child really needed. So like I mentioned, I do have an inner child discovery journal prompt guide, and you can purchase it online and you can fill it out digitally, or you could print it if you want and just fill it out that way, or you could literally just open it up on your computer and then write out in your journal. That's the way I like to do it. And I really think that this journal guide will really help you start your journey on learning more about your inner child and your shadows and the things that you have been suppressing and denying and rejecting and putting off, and learning how to actually for once be aware of these parts of you, and learning how to cultivate a new relationship towards these parts of you, towards your inner child, towards the parts of you that you've never learned how to express in your life. And I really like to look at this journal guide as a self-love guide. This is you for once in your life putting down those walls and deciding, I am going to look deeper within myself, and I'm going to, for the first time, love myself or learn how to love myself. And in that journal guide, I also have some book recommendations, podcast recommendations, and YouTube recommendations that I think will be helpful on this journey of you really discovering yourself deeper and really doing that healing work. But whatever it is that you decide to do, I hope you do something within the next week when it comes to your emotional health, letting yourself feel, connecting to yourself for once in your life, dropping that hyper masculine identity, the part of you that won't let yourself cry, mourn the loss, let go, move on, whatever. I promise you it will do so much for your body, for your mind, for your life. Don't forget to let me know on Spotify what you liked about this episode, what you want to hear next. Of course, next week, like I said, we're going to talk more about that physical side of your emotional health, because our minds and our bodies are connected. I will talk to you guys in the next one. Bye.